So there's a guy who called into C-SPAN after the first deranged and depraved evening of the Republican National Convention. And the guy called in and said he's a lifelong Democrat, but the first night of the Republican convention has convinced him to switch his vote and vote for Donald Trump. Now, I'm going to play the call for you in a moment. But what I want to raise ahead of time is, in reaction to what I'm about to play for you, there's a lot of people who are debating, is the guy for real or is he a troll? Is this for real or is the guy faking and he's really a Trump guy who just called C-SPAN and said that he's a lifelong Democrat? I have some thoughts about that, but I'm actually going to make the case that it doesn't matter, and I'll explain why. But first, let's take a look at the video.
Rick in Lorain, Ohio, Democrat. Hi, Rick.
How you doing tonight? I'm a lifelong Democrat. I'm from Lorain, Ohio, which is a Democrat city in Ohio. And I just want to say, after watching the convention tonight on TV, on C-SPAN here, I am definitely changing my vote to Republican. And I'll tell you what, they just put the Democratic Party or the Republican Party to shame. I'm going to follow the Republican Party now.
But why? What was it that convinced you about tonight?
It was the heartfelt way they came across to the American people, and I was really touched by the number of times they used the word God. They put God into everything, and the people on the Democratic side on their convention act like they were pushing God right out of it. And that had a lot to do with changing my mind.
Now, Rick, did you say you were a union member?
No, sir. I'm from Lorain, Ohio, and we are a Democrat town here and have been for 50 years.
That's it. Thank you so much.
So in terms of whether this is for real or whether this is really a Trump guy who's lying that he's a lifelong Democrat, the guy said that he's calling from a Democrat city in Ohio. I've never met a lifelong Democrat who calls cities Democrat cities. That's how the right talks. That's literally a term out of Trump's playbook from the last 2 or 3 years. So I think that there's certainly reason to doubt whether this guy is sincerely a lifelong Democrat who was convinced to switch and vote for Trump from night one of the from the RNC rather. But it doesn't matter. Okay. This is sort of like looking at retail versus wholesale. The question isn't whether this one guy was really convinced to vote for Trump because of the RNC. Someone in a country of 331 million people with 120 to 135 million expected to vote, someone I'm sure is going to be convinced to vote Trump who was previously thinking they were going to go vote Biden by the RNC. The point is the big picture. First, it's the big picture of conventions. If history is an indicator, conventions don't really do much for either candidate. Typically what you see is one candidate has a convention and they get a little bump, and then the other candidate has a convention and they get a little bump, and then it fades, and by October, nobody remembers it, and we've moved on to other things. The right has tried to make the case that there is a massive movement of Democrats abandoning the Democratic Party and jumping ship to vote for Donald Trump. It's not backed up by the data that we have. There's no doubt that there are disaffected Democrats who don't like the fact that Joe Biden is a candidate. Some of them are going to stay home. Some of them are going to vote for Donald Trump. Likewise, there are people who voted Trump in 2016 who are going to vote for Biden. There is no evidence right now that there are large numbers of Democrats defecting to the Republican Party or planning to vote for Donald Trump. The one caller is not really newsworthy, but there is the more interesting and deeper question about the bigger picture here, which is, are people switching parties? What we know is that most 2016 Trump voters are going to vote for Trump again. What we know is that most 2016 Hillary voters are going to vote for Biden. What we know is that independents are leaning towards Joe Biden. And ultimately, this is going to come down to who votes in which states and how much of the vote can Donald Trump suppress. So maybe it's true that this particular guy was a lifelong Democrat and he was convinced after a life of voting for Democrats to vote for Donald Trump because of Kimberly Guilfoyle screaming on Monday night at the Republican National Convention. Or, as he says, because the Republican convention kept mentioning God. The truth, of course, is that in reality, Joe Biden is more religious than Donald Trump. It's not something I care about, but for people who want a religious candidate, there's no question that Donald Trump's religiosity is completely fabricated and fake as something to appeal to evangelical voters with Trump as a politician, whereas Joe Biden actually seems to be a moderately devout Catholic. I don't care about that, but if you're looking for the religious candidate, it's not Donald Trump, it's Joe Biden. But sure, the caller might be making it up as well. It doesn't matter if we all go out and vote, period. And that is ultimately going to be the one test. It's not, did this guy switch in Ohio? By the way, Ohio not looking as good for Joe Biden as it did before, or I guess better said, looking better for Donald Trump recently than it did before. What matters is if we all go out and vote and the large numbers. And so I wouldn't be lulled into a false debate about whether it's possible that the RNC really shifted a Democrat into voting for Trump. I'm sure some Democrats did get convinced to vote Trump from the RNC, and some Republicans were convinced to vote for Joe Biden from the DNC. We're a country of 331 million. The big picture is what matters. Let's not lose sight of that. And the big picture is Trump's going to try to win by suppressing the vote. Trump's going to try to win by rigging the election. That's the big picture, not whether this guy is a troll. If you've been watching the show, you've probably heard me talk about how much I love my Helix mattress. Well, I was really excited to hear that Helix has launched a new company called Allform, which makes premium, customizable sofas and chairs with the same level of quality and comfort that I expect from these guys. And Allform is one of our sponsors today. They're giving you 20% off at allform.com/Pakman. They actually sent me a couch, which I put in my living room at home. It's now my favorite piece of furniture in the house. It took me just minutes to set it up. It's solidly built. It's huge. It's roomy. It has a modern minimalist design, which I love, but it's also very comfortable. Fabric is soft, clearly very high quality. It has become the focal point of my living room. Their prices are very reasonable. And when you get a new sofa or chair, you get 100 days to decide if you want to keep it. And the best part is everything comes with a lifetime warranty. Stop buying poorly made furniture. Go to customize your own Allform sofa or chair right now and get 20% off your entire order when you get there by going to allform.com/Pakman. I've also put the link right underneath this video.